Hey guys, so in this video we are going to practice factoring. I'm going to show you 3 examples, and hopefully after these 3 examples you'll be a factoring guru. So let's get started. Let's look at this first example here. We have the quadratic x squared minus 17x plus 16. This is a trinomial. Whenever you try to factor a trinomial, you're always going to do something in your head. So in my head, I'm going to try to think of 2 numbers that when I multiply them, I get the AC value, and when I add them, I get my B value. So what do I mean by AC and what do I mean by B? Well, since this is a quadratic, it is in the form a x squared plus bx plus c. So in this case, my A is an imaginary 1. My B is negative 17. And my C is 16. So when I multiply my A times my C, I get 16. And that's what number goes here. And as we just said, my B is negative 17. So now that I know what my AC is, I have to figure out 2 numbers that when I multiply them, I get AC, I get 16. But then when I add them, I get negative 17. So when I'm thinking about how to find these numbers, I remember a rule my 6th grade teacher taught me, Miss Pringle. She taught me that whenever you have a quadratic with a positive right here and a positive right here, your numbers are both going to be positive. Whenever I have a positive and a negative, both of your numbers are going to be negative. So whenever I have a positive C term, my signs are going to be the same. But this right here tells me my sign. They're either both going to be positive or they're both going to be negative. So when I'm looking down here, since I have a negative C term, my signs are going to be opposite. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. My biggest number, my largest number will be positive. And my smaller number will be negative. So technically, I'm going to be subtracting the numbers to get my B term. And you'll see what I mean in my second example. And lastly, this negative means that they're going to be opposite signs, but in this case the largest number will be a negative, so that means the other one will be a positive. I'm still going to end up technically subtracting the numbers to get my B term. So up here I have that second example. I know that my signs are going to be the same and both of them are going to be negatives. I'm trying to think of numbers that multiply to get me 16, and they're both going to be 2 negative numbers, and then when I add them I get negative 17. It's 16 and 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have negative 16 times negative 1. That gets me a positive 16. And then I'm going to have negative 16 minus 1, and that would get me negative 17. So I found my 2 numbers. So what I'm going to do with these 2 numbers is I'm going to take my middle term and I'm going to rewrite it using my 2 numbers. So I no longer have x squared minus 17x plus 16. I'm rewriting this term. So now what I have is x squared minus 16x minus 1x plus 16. And that's exactly what I'm going to write down. I am going to write x squared, but now instead of this, I'm going to write negative 16x negative 1 x, and then I still have my positive 16 at the back. That's the hardest part of factoring, is just figuring out these two numbers. Your hard work is done when you're trying to factor by grouping after you've done this. All you have to do now is find your GCF, and once you've found your GCF, you're just going to work magic. Here we go. I'm going to group the first two, and I'm going to group the last two together. I'm going to find the GCF of my first two terms. It looks like they only have an x in common. I'm going to find the GCF of my last two terms. They don't have anything in common. But then I remember that when they don't have anything in common, they always have a 1. And since my first term in this group is negative, my GCF is going to be a negative 1. Alright, so when I factor out my GCF in my first group, I factored out an x. So if I had two x's and I take out an x, I'm left with 1x. If I had a negative 16x and I took out an x, I am left with just negative 16. In my second group, and I'm only looking at this group now, I have my GCF as a negative 1. Since I have my GCF as a negative 1, I have to think of dividing all of the coefficients by negative 1. So negative 1 divided by negative 1 is just a positive 1. So I'm just left with a positive 1x here. Positive 16 divided by negative 1 is negative 16. I'm excited. I'm happy. If you're in my class, you know exactly why I'm happy. I have twins. We're going to call this twin Phil. We're going to call this twin Lil. I have twins. Since I have twins, I know that I can factor this. I've done all of my math correctly, and I already know my answer. My answer is going to have two parentheses. My first parentheses are going to be my GCFs. I have an x, I have a negative 1. I have an x minus 1. My second parentheses will have my twins in it. My twins were x minus 16, so x minus 16. And bam, I'm done. And I found my answer. Let's go on to the second example. X squared plus 3x minus 28. Alright, so since I have this example, again, I'm looking back over here. I'm looking back over here and I'm saying, is this scenario. I had a negative 28 here. I had a positive 3. So I know that my signs are going to be different. And my largest number is going to be positive. And technically, these numbers are going to have to subtract. So in my head, I'm going to find two numbers that multiply to give me AC. 1 times negative 28. So AC is negative 28. So two numbers that will get me negative 28. But then when I add them, I'll get my B term, which is 3. And I'm remembering my rules. My largest number will be positive. My smaller number is going to be negative. And technically they have to subtract. So two numbers that when I multiply them I get 28, but then technically I'm going to subtract them to get 3. Let me think. Seven times 4? Yep, 7 times 4. So my larger number is going to be positive. So I have positive 7 times negative 4. That would get me negative 28. And then I have positive 7 plus negative 4. So that's really 7 minus 4. And that gives me 3. So I'm good. Alright, so I found my numbers. What am I going to do with those numbers? I'm going to rewrite my middle term using those numbers. So now what I have is x squared plus 7x minus 4 x, and then I still have my minus 28 in the back. Again, I didn't change my x squares, I didn't change my negative 28. I just changed my 3x to a 7x minus 4x. It's still 3x because 7x minus 4x equals 3x. But if I write it like this, if I rewrite my trinomial into 4 terms, I can factor by grouping. I can group the first two and find the GCF of the first two, which in this case, they have an x in common. And I can find the GCF of my second two. In this case, they have a 4 in common. Now, with this 4, it looks like, again, my first term is negative, so my GCF will have a negative 4. If this was a positive, my GCF would be positive. But since this is a negative, my GCF is negative. Alright, so when I factor out an x out of my first grouping, I had 2 x's and I took out an x, so I'm left with just 1 x. I had a 7x, but I'm taking out that x, so I just have a positive 7. When I'm looking at my second group, I'm going to take out a negative 4. So if I have a negative 4x divided by negative 4 divided by negative 4 is just a positive x. And I have negative 28 divided by negative 4. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 28 divided by 4 is 7. I'm excited again. I have my twins. What are these twins going to be called? Dora and Dorian. Why not? Alright, so I have my twins. I'm going to write my twins. I had an x. I'm going to write my GCFs. I had an x and I had a negative 4, so it's x minus 4. And then I have my twins. My twins are x plus 7. I have my answer. I am happy. If I did not get twins here, I messed something up and I have to go back and look at my works. 9 times out of 10, if I didn't get a twin, I messed up my GCF, or I messed up at the very beginning when I was trying to find my numbers. And usually it's one or the other. Last example. Here we go. I still have to think about things in my head. So in my head, I'm still going to find 2 numbers that multiply and 2 numbers that add to get me my AC and my B. Alright. Ooh, A is not 1. A is 3. 3 times negative 6. Yep, 18. So I have to find 2 numbers that when I multiply them, I'll get 18. But then when I add them, I get negative 7. And actually that's a negative 18. So I have to make sure I get my signs correct. Alright. So 2 numbers that multiply to get me negative 18. But then when I add them, I get negative 7. I'm looking over here at the rules again. I had a negative 6 and a negative 7. So my signs are going to be opposite. And the largest number will be negative. Alright. So, 2 numbers. Let me think. What about 9 and 2. Because technically, they're going to have to subtract to get me to get me 7. So 9 minus 2 does equal 7. And 9 times 2 does give me 18. So let's see if it works. So if I had negative 9 plus 2, multiplying them will get me negative 18. Negative 9 plus 2, adding them, yep, will get me negative 7. I found my numbers. Alright, so since I found my numbers, now all I have to do is, yep, rewrite that middle term. So that 3x squared stays the same. But the negative 7x turns into negative 9x and a positive 2x. And I still have a minus 6 right there. I did not change my first term. I did not change my last term. I just changed my middle term into a term using those two numbers. So now I'm going to group my first two together, group my second two together. Alright, trying to find my GCF of my first two. The GCF of my first two looks like I have a 3 in both of these, because 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 9, and I have an x. So 3x. GCF for my second two, I have a 2 in both of these, and I don't have an x, so it's just going to be 2. And since this is positive, my GCF is going to be positive. Alright, factor out my 3x. When I'm factoring out my 3x, okay, so I'm going to do it step by step. 3 divided by 3 is 1. X squared, taking away one of those x's, would just leave me with a 1x. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. And I took away the x's, so I'll just have that negative 3 there. Alright, second group. I'm going to factor out my positive 2. And I'm going to figure out what's left. So a 2x, and then divided by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, so I'm just left with an x. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Because again, a negative divided by a positive will get me my negatives. I'm happy. I have my twins. I know I did my work right. So what are these twins going to be called? What about thing 1 and thing 2? Looks good to me. Alright, so I just need to write my answer now. My answer are my GCFs. 3x, positive 2, 3x plus 2. My twins, and life is good. And I factored, and this can be used for any trinomial that can be factored. If you cannot find numbers to fit these rules, if you cannot find two numbers that multiply to give you AC, but then when you add them you get B, then the trinomial cannot be factored. And so then it's really easy, because all you'll do is you'll write prime, P-R-I-M-E. That is it. But if you can find numbers, it will be factorable every time. And this is how you do it. And this factoring is called factoring by grouping, because once you rewrite this middle term into two terms, you have the ability to group the first two, group the second two. And once you group the first two and you group the second two, all you have to do is find the GCF of the first group, is 3x, find the GCF of the second group, and then factor out the GCF. You'll get twins every time if you did your work right. If you don't get twins, you did something wrong. Alright, I hope this helped. Please leave a comment with any questions or just ask me in class.